This is the best way to build muscle, according to legendary Mike Mentzer. Many workouts we follow are based on conflicting information, myths perpetuated for decades, and practices that don't take into account individuality, rest, and the correct intensity that each exercise should have. The result? Months or even years at the gym, and despite all the effort, unsatisfactory muscle growth. However, there is a training approach that promises to simplify all this and still produce extremely solid muscle mass gains. It's the method advocated by Mike Mentzer, one of the greatest exponents of bodybuilding of all time. For those who don't know, Mike Mentzer was an American bodybuilder, well known for his revolutionary training approach called heavy duty. In summary, he believed that most people were training more than necessary and resting less than they should, which would result in stagnation, injuries, and frustrations. Despite having had a relatively short career on stage, mainly due to disagreements with the competitive universe of the time and the way he was judged in championships, Mentzer was one of the pioneers in defending a high-intensity training method, few sets, low volume, and adequate rest intervals. Additionally, he brought up discussions about the importance of understanding body physiology instead of simply copying the workout of someone stronger or more famous at the gym. Mike Mentzer's philosophy revolved around the belief that, to evolve, the body needs to go through a stimulus strong enough to break its current barriers, but also needs adequate rest to recover and grow. In his conception, the most common mistake made by weightlifting practitioners was the famous overtraining, workouts with high repetitions, many sets, and a frequency of more days than the body could handle. In other words, it was as if everyone was, somehow, spending too much ammunition without allowing the body to recover and strengthen itself. But don't confuse Mentzer's philosophy with less effort. Quite the contrary. In the heavy-duty method, each set is done with very high intensity, at the absolute limit. The idea is that you go to total muscle failure, making each repetition with maximum concentration, without spacing out workouts too much, and without failing to work at your limit. While many think that the muscle growth formula is to do several sets and repeat the same muscle group 2 or even 3 times a week, Mike hammered on the idea that, if you train truly heavy, you don't need and shouldn't repeat that training session so many times in a short period. He believed that increasing training volume could even offer some results at first, but sooner or later, the lack of rest would generate the dreaded stagnation, or worse, a loss of performance. Something we see a lot in practice when a person goes to the gym religiously, but doesn't evolve in load, doesn't improve rest times, and their physique remains the same, sometimes even with high levels of fatigue and small injuries appearing throughout the body. Beyond the rest factor, Mentzer talked a lot about load progression. If the goal is hypertrophy, then it's not just about doing repetitions for the sake of it. You need to progressively overload the muscle, whether by increasing weight, more controlled reduction of the eccentric phase, decreasing rest time between sets, or a combination of these elements. At this point, nutrition doesn't get left out either. Although Mike Mentzer was mainly associated with high-intensity training, he never failed to emphasize that the body demands quality nutrients to recover from the micro-tears generated by heavy training. What he harshly criticized was the overdose of supplements without criteria or eating in excess without controlling the quality of food, because everything the body doesn't use turns into fat or ends up generating unnecessary stress in terms of metabolic processing. Another crucial point in Mentzer's methodology is mindset. He believed that it's no use doing exercises automatically, following repetitions and sets without a real purpose. Each repetition should be seen as a challenge to be overcome, activating the maximum mind-muscle connection to recruit the greatest number of fibers possible during each movement. Training focused requires having clarity at each stage of execution: speed, range of motion, body alignment, breathing, and of course, intensity. This approach aligns with that of many contemporary athletes who also emphasize the importance of training with quality and not just quantity. Mentzer also said that patience was a key part of the process. There's no point in wanting to gain 22 pounds of muscle mass in a few weeks without respecting the biological needs of the body. In practice, the heavy-duty protocol recommended few sets, sometimes just 1 or 2 for each exercise, performed with perfect technique and going to the absolute limit. There was also the rest interval between sessions, which reached 48 or even 72 hours or more for the same muscle group, according to the applied intensity. This is radically different from what you see in many gym routines, where the student does 3 or 4 sets of 8 to 12 repetitions for each exercise, 3 or 4 times a week, believing that more training will mean more results. Mentzer would probably say that more intensity in less volume means not only more results, but also more health. One of the discussions that always surrounded heavy duty is biological individuality. Not everyone responds the same way to high intensity, and not everyone can achieve the same true failure in exercises. Therefore, there are those who adapt the method for themselves, adding some warm-up sets and working in a way to make sure they are achieving maximum muscle contraction without compromising joints and tendons. Mentzer himself did not deny that each person had their history of injuries, their progression rate, and a specific lifestyle that could influence the results. But if there is a consensus in his philosophy, it is that excess training without rest is as harmful as sedentary lifestyle. In other words, it's no use killing yourself at the gym every day and then not giving your body the time it needs to recover. It's during rest that hypertrophy in fact happens. The stimulus comes from training, but adaptation and growth emerge when the body is at rest, well-fed, free from unnecessary stress, and ready to return to the training cycle in the next session. This raises the question, how to set up a workout based on Mike Mentzer's principles. First, you should select few exercises, but ones that are really effective in recruiting the greatest number of muscle fibers. For the chest, for example, it's not necessary to do 4 types of bench press and 3 types of fly. If you do a decline or flat bench press with the right weight, in the correct range of motion and going to failure, many times this is enough to stimulate great development as long as you maintain consistency and progress. Then, the idea is to maintain a considerable rest interval before training that same muscle again. Mentzer advocated the use of heavy weights, but always with impeccable execution form. If you can't control the weight during the entire repetition, then that load is probably too far beyond your capabilities. There is no room for ego within the heavy-duty method. You shouldn't simply move the weight from point A to point B, but do so with control, so that both the concentric and eccentric phases of the movement are properly exploited. This way of training creates intense muscle micro-lesions, which demand more recovery time afterward. And if you're tempted to think that this method is easy or less hard work, just talk to someone who has already tried to do a single set in Mentzer style, to total failure, to understand how brutal this session can be. Many contemporary athletes, including Dorian Yates, followed principles very close to those of Mike Mentzer. Yates himself used to say that he did very few sets, but with very high intensity, and there's a multi-champion bodybuilder who clearly shows the effect of this type of approach. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because having access to correct information is what will make you truly progress in the long term in the fitness world. The principle of maximum intensity, for example, doesn't mean doing everything quickly and in any way. On the contrary, it's about being meticulous and patient in the unfolding of each repetition. Mentzer talked a lot about controlling movements, arguing that in heavy duty, the eccentric phase, the one in which the muscle is elongating under tension, should be done in a particularly slow and deliberate manner. This slowness not only maximizes tension in the muscle, but also helps prevent cheating in execution, which are nothing more than ways for the body to facilitate movement and take part of the load off the target muscle group. You've probably seen people training with momentum, swinging the trunk, bringing unnecessary help from other muscles, or even asking their gym partner to practically lift the bar for them. Mentzer considered all of this a waste because, in his view, if it wasn't the target muscle that did the work, what's the point of the repetition? The notion of intensity, in this case, was 100% focused on the quality of the stimulus and not on cheating to lift more weight on the bar. Another point defended by Mike Mentzer was related to training frequency. While many routines suggest that the same muscle group be trained several times a week, Mentzer went against this idea for most people. He explained that if you really reach failure in those few movements, it won't be necessary to repeat the same group 2 or 3 times a week, as this might simply not give enough time for the muscle to recover. The rule here is, did you really train heavy? Then give the body a rest proportional to the level of stress that was generated. Of course, there are those who criticize this method for thinking it's too little volume, and that, without volume, hypertrophy isn't created. Mentzer would counter by saying that hypertrophy comes from a strong muscle rupture stimulus, and that excess volume would only prolong the duration of the workout without increasing the quality of the stimulus. Although controversial, we can't deny that there are countless reports of people who, by decreasing training frequency and increasing focus on intensity, finally managed to break plateaus that had dragged on for months. But how to transfer all this to the daily life of those who train in crowded gyms and often need to adapt to available machines, schedules, and even the lack of specific equipment? The idea is to try to extract the maximum from each opportunity you have to train, maintaining the principle of few sets and maximum intensity. If you only have, for example, half an hour free, it might be ideal to apply this method because you will do fewer exercises, but with very high intensity. And during the rest of the day or the following days, prioritize quality sleep, balanced diet, and the necessary hydration to repair the muscle tissue that was stimulated. In Mike Mentzer's opinion, the mind is the starting point of everything. If you start the workout already mentally tired, without motivation, it's difficult to reach real muscle failure. Real failure, or concentric failure, means that in that exercise, following good execution form, you can't do any additional repetition, even if you try with all your strength. This doesn't happen as easily if you're talking, checking your phone, or distracted. It requires total concentration and determination. One of the secrets of heavy duty is that it practically forces the practitioner to take each repetition seriously, as there is no room for second chances in extra sets and more extras. Mentzer also brought the idea of working each muscle as a link in a chain. Having powerful back is of no use if your abdomen, arms, or legs don't have at least minimally compatible development. He advocated that the body should be trained harmoniously, although his philosophy did not prescribe infinite exercises for each part. Instead, an intelligent selection of compound movements was made, such as squats, bench press, deadlifts, pull-ups, rows, and shoulder press, which activate a large part of the musculature globally. From there, it was possible to give special attention to some weak point, making a more specific movement, but always respecting the general guideline of few sets at high intensity. Many practitioners have doubts about how to measure intensity and know if they are already ready to increase the load or adjust the rest interval. For Mentzer, the body is an excellent indicator. When you truly reach muscle failure, the sensation during and after the workout usually leaves no margin for doubt. You get that impression that you absolutely couldn't do even one more repetition. Then, in the following hours or days, depending on your conditioning stage, you feel the musculature sore, but not to the point of being injured or incapacitated. It's a natural discomfort of recovery that, with adaptation, diminishes. If you don't feel any of this, maybe you're not training with the intensity intended by the method. If you feel extreme pain that hinders even simple movements for many days, perhaps you're exaggerating on the load or execution. This balance is very personal, and therefore each practitioner should ideally record the evolution of loads, repetitions, and even the sensation of effort in the workout. This way, it's possible to clearly perceive when the body asks for more weight, when it's time to reduce the number of repetitions or, in some cases, slightly increase the volume. After all, Mentzer's heavy-duty methodology is not a manual of fixed and immutable rules, but a set of principles that can be adapted, as long as the base is maintained. Some people question, and the repetitions, how many to do? Mike Mentzer used to indicate something around 6 to 10 repetitions, depending on the exercise and the specific objective, but always with the guidance to go to failure. It made no sense for him to keep counting repetitions if you weren't reaching this point of exhaustion. He also warned of the danger of trying to cheat at the end of each set, because it was at this moment of pain and difficulty that the muscle was most stimulated to grow. Being able to overcome the temptation to end a set on the 7th repetition, when the 8th and 9th are precisely the ones that will create the greatest stimulus, is a huge mental challenge. Another indispensable pillar in Mentzer's vision was consistency. He said that you can only truly evaluate if the method is working if you give yourself enough time for adaptations. There's no point in thinking that you're going to train in the heavy-duty style for 2 weeks, and, if nothing happens, return to the previous routine. It takes at least a few months of dedication, recording progress, and learning about how your body reacts to this training model. It's a process of fine-tuning the approach until it fits perfectly with your profile. Of course, all this care and dedication doesn't exclude the possibility of alternating periods of heavy-duty training with other modalities or methods. Some professional bodybuilders did cycles of high intensity and then went through periods of moderate volume periodization, both to give rest to tendons and ligaments and to vary the muscle stimulus. Each body reacts in a way. For some, staying too long only at very high intensity can lead to a level of psychological wear. For others, this is the perfect fuel to keep motivation always high, since the sessions are short, but extremely challenging. It's worth emphasizing once again that Mike Mentzer was a voice that opposed common sense and even idols of his time who advocated gigantic training routines. In times when so many miraculous promises emerge through the internet, returning to the roots of a method like Mentzer's can be precisely the differential for you to break barriers that seemed insurmountable. In the end, what Mentzer proposed is an intelligent partnership with your musculature, instead of a stubborn fight to see who can handle more repetitions, or how many more hours I can stay at the gym. Having understood all this, it's up to each one to evaluate which path to take. Not everyone will adapt right away to heavy duty. Some prefer hybrid systems. Others fall in love with the method as soon as they see how effective it can be. And here comes valuable advice from Mentzer himself. Never stop studying the subject. The more you learn, the more you understand how your body works, and less time you waste on strategies that don't apply to your case. After all, each human being is unique in terms of genetics, metabolism, and lifestyle, but we all follow the basic laws of physiology. If applied intelligently, these laws become the key to constant muscle growth. This is the essence of what Mike Mentzer advocated, and many who follow in his footsteps categorically claim that they haven't changed their training style again after they saw the transformations it can generate. Here's the reflection. To have different results, perhaps you need different strategies. If you liked it and want to start applying it, don't forget to check out the only 2 exercises you need to have giant legs. The video is appearing right now on your screen. Thank you for watching this far, and may God continue to bless you, my friend.